The slap echoed through the Sands Hotel dining room like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze midair. And Dean Martin, sitting 3 tables away with a glass of scotch he wasn't actually drinking, saw the whole thing. The waiter, a kid who couldn't have been more than 22, stumbled backward, his tray clattering to the floor. His cheek was already turning red, and standing over him, straightening his cufflinks like he'd just swatted a fly, was Tommy the Hammer Marcello, a man whose nickname wasn't metaphorical. Dean didn't move. Not yet. He just watched as Tommy leaned down and said something to the kid, something quiet enough that only the people at his table could hear. But Dean could read lips, and he saw the words clear as day. "Pick it up and bring me another steak. And this time, don't you dare bring me something burned, you worthless—" The rest wasn't worth repeating. The kid scrambled to pick up the broken plates, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip them. Blood was dripping from a cut on his palm where he'd grabbed a piece of shattered china. And not a single person in that dining room moved to help him. Because in Las Vegas, 1966, you didn't help someone that Tommy Marcello had decided to humiliate. You looked away. You minded your business. You survived. But Dean Martin wasn't like everyone else. To understand what happened next, you need to understand 3 things about Las Vegas in 1966. First, the mob didn't just influence the city, they owned it. Every casino, every hotel, every show was connected to organized crime in some way. Second, Tommy the Hammer Marcello wasn't just connected. He was a made man, an enforcer for the Chicago outfit with a reputation for violence that made grown men cross the street when they saw him coming. And third, Dean Martin had already earned a reputation as the one entertainer in Vegas who refused to bow to anyone. He'd proven it a year earlier when he'd faced down Vincent Antonelli on stage. That story had become legend in the underworld. But this was different. Antonelli had been challenging Dean directly. This waiter, this kid, he was nobody. He was invisible. And that's exactly why Dean couldn't walk away. Dean stood up from his table. His friends, a couple of producers and a comedian whose name has been lost to history, tried to stop him. "Dean, don't," one of them whispered. "That's Tommy Marcello. You know who he is." "Yeah," Dean said, setting down his napkin. "I know who he is." He walked across the dining room with that same casual grace he had on stage. Not hurried, not aggressive, just present. Every eye in the room followed him. The waiter was still on his knees, picking up pieces of broken plate, trying not to cry. Tommy Marcello was back in his seat, laughing with his crew like nothing had happened. Dean stopped at Tommy's table. "Tommy," Dean said, his voice smooth as velvet, "how's the steak?" Tommy looked up, momentarily, surprised. Then his face split into a grin. "Dean Martin, the king of cool himself. Steak's terrible, that's how it is. Burned to hell. That's why I had to educate the help." "Educate," Dean repeated, nodding slowly. He glanced down at the waiter, still on his knees, blood dripping from his hand. "That what we're calling it now?" The table went quiet. Tommy's smile didn't fade, but something changed in his eyes. Something cold and calculating. "You got a problem with how I handle my service, Dean?" "I got a problem with a grown man slapping a kid who's just trying to do his job," Dean said. His tone was still casual, almost friendly, but everyone in the room could feel the shift in the air. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was a line being drawn. Tommy's crew, 3 large men in expensive suits, shifted in their seats. One of them started to stand, but Tommy raised a hand to stop him. "Sit down, Frankie. Let me talk to Mr. Martin here." He looked back at Dean. "You know what your problem is, Dean? You think because you sing pretty songs and make people laugh, you can stick your nose in places it don't belong." "Maybe," Dean said. He pulled out a chair and sat down at Tommy's table without being invited. The audacity of it made several people in the dining room gasp quietly. "Or maybe I just don't like watching guys get pushed around when they can't push back." Tommy leaned forward. "That kid spilled soup on my jacket last week. He brought me cold coffee yesterday, and tonight he burns my steak. 3 strikes, Dean. That's fair. That's more than fair." Dean glanced at the waiter, who was now standing holding his tray like a shield. The kid's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He was waiting to see if this was going to get worse or better. Dean turned back to Tommy. "You know what I think happened? What's that? I think you ordered your steak well done, like you always do. And I think this kid brought you exactly what you ordered. But you were having a bad day, maybe someone disrespected you somewhere else, and you needed to feel big again. So you took it out on the easiest target in the room. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Nobody spoke to Tommy Marcello like that. Nobody. One of Tommy's guys, the one called Frankie, spoke up. Mr. Martin, I think you should go back to your table now. Dean didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Tommy. What do you think, Tommy? Am I right, or do you really believe that kid burned your steak on purpose just to ruin your evening? Tommy stared at Dean for a long moment. His jaw was clenched so tight you could see the muscles working beneath his skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. You're making a mistake, Dean. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Dean said. But standing up for a kid who can't defend himself, that's not one of them. What Dean didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Tommy Marcello had been nursing a grudge against the Sands Hotel for months. The casino had started cutting back on the complimentary services they provided to certain mob associates. Free rooms were becoming harder to get. Credit lines were being questioned. The slap wasn't really about the steak. It was about power. It was about reminding everyone who really ran this town. And now Dean Martin was challenging that power in front of a room full of witnesses. Tommy leaned back in his chair and smiled, but it was the smile of a shark. Okay, Dean, okay. You want to play the hero? Fine. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to me right now, in front of everyone here. You're going to tell me you were out of line, and then you're going to walk away, and we'll forget this ever happened. Dean tilted his head slightly. And if I don't? If you don't, Tommy said slowly, then you and I are going to have a serious problem. And I don't think you want that kind of problem, Dean. Not with me. The dining room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's drinks. Every person there knew they were witnessing something dangerous. This wasn't entertainment. This was real. Dean Martin could walk away right now. He could apologize, save face, and go back to his life. Tommy would save face too. Everyone would survive. But then Dean looked at the waiter again. The kid was still standing there, blood on his hand, humiliation written all over his face. And Dean saw something in that kid's eyes that reminded him of himself, back when he was just Dino Crocetti from Steubenville, Ohio, getting pushed around by guys who thought they owned the world. Dean stood up from the chair. For a moment, everyone thought he was going to walk away. But instead, he did something nobody expected. Dean walked over to the waiter and gently took the tray from his trembling hands. What's your name, kid? The waiter's voice was barely a whisper. Michael. Michael Rossini. Michael, Dean said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. How long you been working here? 6 months, Mr. Martin? You like the job? Michael hesitated, glancing nervously at Tommy's table. Yes, sir, I need the job. My mother, she's sick and... It's okay, Dean said gently. He turned to face the dining room, still holding the tray. Everybody see this kid's hand? He's bleeding because he was cleaning up broken plates. Plates that got broken because a customer didn't like his steak. Dean's voice was calm, conversational, but it carried to every corner of the room. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but where I come from, we don't hit people who are just trying to earn an honest living. Tommy slammed his hand on the table. Dean, you're crossing a line. You crossed it first, Dean shot back. Then he did something that would become the stuff of legend. He walked back to Tommy's table, set the tray down, and picked up the supposedly burned steak with his bare hands. He looked at it, turned it over, examined it like a jeweler inspecting a diamond. This steak, Dean announced to the room, is cooked exactly the way Tommy ordered it. Well done. No pink, charred on the outside, just like he likes it. He set it back down on the plate. There's nothing wrong with this steak except that Tommy decided there was something wrong with it. Tommy stood up now, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was a big man, bigger than Dean, and when he stood, he towered over him. You calling me a liar, Dean? I'm calling you a bully, Dean said simply. "And I'm telling you that if you've got a problem, you take it up with someone who can fight back. You don't slap kids who are just trying to feed their families." The men at Tommy's table all stood up now. 3 large men, all known enforcers, all with reputations for violence. The implication was clear. This was about to get physical, but Dean didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just stood there, relaxed, like he was waiting for the band to start playing so he could sing his next song. "Dean," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "I'm going to give you one more chance. Walk away, right now, or what happens next is on you." Dean smiled that famous sleepy smile. "You know what, Tommy? You're right. This is on me." He turned to Michael, who was watching in absolute terror. "Michael, go to the kitchen. Get yourself cleaned up. Take the rest of the night off. Tell the manager Dean Martin said you get full pay for tonight." "But Mr. Martin—" "Go on, kid, you're done here." Michael hesitated for just a second, then practically ran toward the kitchen. The moment he was gone, Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Martin." "Maybe," Dean said. "But at least I can look at myself in the mirror tomorrow morning. Can you say the same?" That's when Tommy swung. It was a wild, angry punch. The kind of punch thrown by a man who's used to people backing down before it ever connects. But Dean had grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, where the mob kids and the working-class kids settled their differences in alleys behind the pool halls. He'd been in his share of fights before he became famous. He saw the punch coming from a mile away. Dean stepped to the side, not a big movement, just a small, efficient dodge, and Tommy's fist went sailing past his head. The momentum carried Tommy forward, and he stumbled, catching himself on a nearby table. Glasses shattered. A woman screamed. Tommy's 3 guys moved in immediately, but before they could reach Dean, something unexpected happened. The other men in the dining room, businessmen, high rollers, even a couple of off-duty dealers, stood up from their tables. Not to fight, but to form a human barrier between Dean and Tommy's crew. One of them, a gray-haired man in an expensive suit, spoke up. "Tommy, that's enough. We all saw what happened. The kid didn't do nothing wrong. You started this." Another voice chimed in. "Dean's right. You can't just go around hitting people because you're having a bad day." Tommy looked around the room, his face purple with rage and humiliation. He was being challenged not just by Dean Martin, but by the entire dining room. These were customers, high-value customers, people the Sands couldn't afford to upset, and they were siding with the entertainer over the mobster. For the first time in his life, Tommy, the Hammer Marcello, was outnumbered, not by guns or muscle, but by public opinion, by decency, by people who had finally seen enough. Tommy pointed a shaking finger at Dean. "This isn't over, Martin. You hear me? This isn't over." "It is for tonight," Dean said calmly. "And Tommy, next time you eat here, maybe try being nice to the staff. You might actually enjoy your meal." Tommy and his crew stormed out of the dining room, knocking over a chair on their way out. The moment they were gone, the entire room exhaled. It was like someone had released a pressure valve. People started talking again, nervously at first, then with growing excitement. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Dean Martin had faced down one of the most dangerous men in Las Vegas, and he'd won, not with violence, but with courage and the simple act of standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. Dean walked back to his table and sat down. His hands were steady as he picked up his scotch. One of his friends leaned in and whispered, "Dean, you know he's going to come after you for this, right?" "Maybe," Dean said, taking a sip. "But that kid gets to go home tonight with his dignity. That's worth whatever comes next." What came next would surprise everyone. The next morning, Dean woke up in his suite at the Sands expecting trouble. Maybe a threatening phone call. Maybe a message delivered by one of Tommy's guys. Maybe worse. But the call that came wasn't from Tommy Marcello. It was from Jack Intrater, the president of the Sands Hotel, and the man who essentially ran the entertainment side of the operation. "Dean, we need to talk. My office. Now." Dean arrived at Intrater's office 20 minutes later, still in his sunglasses, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed, which he had. Entratter was behind his desk, smoking a cigar, and he didn't look happy. "Sit down, Dean." Dean sat. "Jack, before you say anything." "What the hell were you thinking?" Entratter exploded. "Tommy Marcello? You had to pick a fight with Tommy Marcello? Do you have any idea what kind of position you put me in? What kind of position you put this hotel in?" "The kid didn't deserve what Tommy did to him," Dean said simply. "I don't care what the kid deserved," Entratter shouted. "Dean, I've got the Chicago outfit breathing down my neck. I've got Tommy demanding that I fire you, ban you from the property, maybe worse. Do you understand how serious this is?" Dean leaned back in his chair. "So fire me." Entratter stopped mid-rant. "What?" "Fire me," Dean repeated. "If that's what you need to do to keep the peace with Tommy, then do it. I'm not apologizing for what I did, Jack. That kid was just trying to do his job." Entratter stared at Dean for a long moment. Then he started to laugh, a tired, exasperated laugh. "You're either the bravest son of a bitch I've ever met or the stupidest. I honestly can't tell which." "Probably both," Dean said with a slight smile. Entratter sat back down and took a long drag on his cigar. "I'm not firing you, Dean. You know why? Because after you left last night, something interesting happened. Every single person in that dining room came to the front desk to tell management what they saw. Businessmen, high rollers, even some of the other connected guys. They all said the same thing. Tommy was out of line and you did the right thing." Dean raised his eyebrows. "They said that?" "Word for word," Entratter confirmed. "And then this morning, I started getting calls. Customers saying they want to come see your show specifically because of what you did. We've sold out the next 3 nights in 2 hours. People want to see the guy who stood up to Tommy Marcello." Dean didn't say anything. He just processed that information. Entratter continued. "Here's the thing, Dean. The mob might own the casinos, but you know what keeps the lights on? Customers. And customers don't like seeing waiters get slapped. They don't like bullies. You gave them something they didn't know they wanted. A hero." "I'm not a hero, Jack. I just did what was right." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Entratter said. "Look, Tommy's still pissed. I'm not going to lie to you. But he's also smart enough to know that he lost last night. He lost in front of a room full of people. And if he comes after you now, he looks even worse. You embarrassed him, but you also gave him an out. He can walk away, blame it on a bad night, and save face." "And if he doesn't walk away?" Dean asked. Entratter sighed. "Then we've got a problem, but my money's on him letting it go. Tommy's a lot of things, but he's not stupid. He knows when to cut his losses." Dean stood up to leave, but Entratter called after him. "Dean, that kid, Michael Rossini, he came in this morning asking if he still had a job. He was terrified." "Does he?" "Not only does he have a job," Entratter said with a smile, "but I promoted him. He's working the VIP section now. Better tips, better hours. Figured after what he went through, he deserved it." Dean smiled, a real, genuine smile. "Thanks, Jack." "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You made me remember something I'd forgotten. We're in the hospitality business. And that means treating people with respect. All people. Even the ones serving the steaks." Dean walked out of Entratter's office, feeling lighter than he had in years. But the story didn't end there. Because 3 days later, on a Tuesday evening, something happened that nobody could have predicted. Dean was in his dressing room, getting ready for his show, when there was a knock at the door. His assistant opened it, and standing in the hallway was a man Dean recognized immediately. It was Frankie, one of Tommy Marcello's guys from that night. Dean's assistant went pale. "Mr. Martin, should I—" "It's okay," Dean said calmly. "Let him in." Frankie stepped into the dressing room and closed the door behind him. He was a big man, easily 250 pounds, with hands like sledgehammers. He stood there for a moment, just looking at Dean. "Tommy sent you?" Dean asked. "Yeah," Frankie said. "He sent me." Dean nodded slowly. "To deliver a message?" "Something like that." Frankie reached into his jacket, and for a split second, Dean's assistant thought about running for help. But what Frankie pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was an envelope. He handed it to Dean. "Tommy wanted you to have this." Dean opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. The handwriting was surprisingly neat, almost elegant. Dean, you made me look like a fool the other night. Part of me wants to make you pay for that. But the bigger part of me knows you were right. I was having a bad day and I took it out on that kid. That wasn't right. I'm not apologizing. Men like me don't apologize. But I am acknowledging that you did what you thought was right, and there's honor in that. You stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself. That takes guts. We're even, you and me. I won't bother you, you don't bother me. But know this, what you did that night, it got around. People in my world, they're talking about it. Some of them think you're crazy, but some of them, the ones who matter, they respect you for it. You're all right, Martin. TM. Dean folded the note and looked up at Frankie. He wrote this himself? Every word, Frankie confirmed. And Dean, between you and me, what you did for that kid, that was stand-up. My old man was a waiter in Brooklyn, worked his whole life getting treated like dirt by guys like Tommy. Seeing you stand up for Michael like that, it meant something. Dean extended his hand and Frankie shook it. Tell Tommy we're good. Will do. Frankie turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. Tommy wanted me to tell you. He went back to the Sands last night. Had dinner. Same dining room. Michael was his waiter. Dean felt his chest tighten. And? Frankie smiled. Tommy ordered the steak. Well done. When Michael brought it out, Tommy looked at it, cut into it, took a bite. Then he looked at the kid and said, perfect. Best steak I've had in weeks. Left him $100 tip. After Frankie left, Dean just stood there for a moment, holding the note. His assistant, still shaken, asked, Dean, what just happened? Dean smiled and tucked the note into his pocket. Something good. Something really good. That night's performance was electric. Dean walked onto the stage of the Copa Room to a standing ovation before he'd even sung a note. Word had spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. The entertainer who'd stood up to Tommy the Hammer Marcello, the singer who'd defended a waiter, the man who'd put his career, maybe even his life, on the line for a kid he didn't even know. Dean did what he always did. He smiled that easy smile, loosened his bow tie, and said, Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hear there's been some talk about a little incident in the dining room the other night. The audience laughed nervously, not sure where he was going with this. Let me tell you something, Dean continued, his voice casual but carrying a weight that made everyone lean in. I've been in this business a long time. I've sung for presidents and gangsters, millionaires and working stiffs. And you know what I've learned? It doesn't matter how much money you have or how tough you are. What matters is how you treat people when nobody's looking, how you treat the people who can't do anything for you. He paused, letting that sink in. That kid, Michael, he's working his ass off every night to take care of his sick mother. He's doing everything right, and somebody decided that wasn't enough, that he deserved to be humiliated. Well, I don't care who you are or what kind of power you think you have. That's not okay. That's never going to be okay. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. People were on their feet again, but Dean wasn't finished. Now, I'm happy to report that Michael still has his job. In fact, he got promoted. And the gentleman who had the disagreement with him, we worked it out, like men, with respect. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us really want. A little respect, a little dignity, the chance to do our jobs and go home to the people we love. Dean picked up his drink, water, though the audience thought it was scotch, and raised it. So here's to Michael Rossini, and to every waiter, every dealer, every maid, every person working their tail off in this town to make our lives a little easier. You're the real stars of Las Vegas. The audience erupted, and somewhere in the back of the room, standing by the bar where he thought nobody would notice him, Michael Rossini was crying. But the real impact of what Dean had done wouldn't be fully understood for weeks, because something had shifted in Las Vegas that night, something fundamental. The mob still ran the town. The money still flowed through their hands. But a message had been sent. Entertainers weren't just puppets. They weren't just assets to be controlled. They were people with voices, with power, with the ability to stand up and say no when something wasn't right. Other performers started to notice. When a casino manager tried to force Sammy Davis Jr. to use the back entrance because of his race, Sammy refused and cited Dean's example. When a club owner tried to stiff a band on their payment, Frank Sinatra stepped in, and the owner paid up immediately, remembering what happened to the last guy who crossed the Rat Pack. The story spread beyond Las Vegas. It was written up in Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, though the details were carefully sanitized to avoid naming Tommy Marcello directly. But everyone in the industry knew. Dean Martin had drawn a line in the sand, and the mob had respected it. Years later, in 1979, a journalist asked Dean about that night. Dean, by then in his 60s and long retired from performing, was characteristically dismissive. "People make too much of it," he said, sipping his coffee. "A guy was being a jerk to a kid. I told him to knock it off, that's all." "But weren't you afraid?" the journalist pressed. "Tommy Marcello had a reputation for violence." Dean thought about that for a moment, then shrugged. "You know what I was more afraid of? Seeing that kid's face. Seeing him humiliated like that and doing nothing about it. I was more afraid of being the kind of man who looks away when someone needs help. Do you think you changed anything that night?" Dean smiled. "I think I helped one kid keep his job and his dignity. If that changed something bigger, then that's great. But honestly, I did it for Michael. Everything else was just a bonus." But Michael Rossini remembered it differently. In an interview given decades later, after Dean had passed away, Michael, by then the manager of a successful restaurant in Los Angeles, was asked about that night. "Mr. Martin saved my life," Michael said, his eyes getting misty. "Not literally, but I was about to quit. I was going to give up on Vegas, give up on my dreams, go back to New Jersey and work in my uncle's dry cleaning business. I thought that's all I was worth. That's what guys like Tommy Marcello made me believe." "And then Dean stood up for you." "He didn't just stand up for me," Michael corrected. "He stood up for every person who's ever been pushed around by someone with more power. He showed me that you don't have to accept being treated like you're less than human, that you're worth defending even if you're just a waiter." Michael paused, collecting himself. "You want to know the crazy part? 2 weeks after that night, I was working the VIP section like Mr. Entratter promised, and guess who came in for dinner? Dean Martin. He sat in my section, ordered the osso buco, and when I brought it out, he looked up at me and said, 'How's your mother, Michael?'" He remembered. Out of everything happening in his life, all the shows and the fame and everything else, he remembered to ask about my mother. "What did you say?" "I told him she was doing better, that with my promotion, I could afford better medicine for her. And you know what Dean did?" He smiled at me and said, "Good. That's good, kid. You take care of her. Family's the only thing that really matters." Michael's voice broke slightly. "When I brought him the check, he'd already paid it at the front desk, and he left me a tip, $500. In 1966, that was 3 months' rent. There was a note with it that said, 'For your mother's medicine, DM.'" The journalist was quiet for a moment. "That must have meant a lot." "It meant everything," Michael said. "But you know what meant even more? The fact that he treated me like a human being, like I mattered. In a town where people like me were invisible, Dean Martin saw me, and he made sure everyone else saw me too." The incident at the Sands Hotel became one of those stories that gets told and retold, embellished and mythologized. Some versions say Dean knocked out Tommy Marcello with one punch. Others claim the entire dining room erupted into a brawl. None of those versions are true. The truth is simpler and somehow more powerful. Dean Martin saw someone being hurt, and he stepped in. He didn't do it for publicity. He didn't do it to boost his image. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he proved something that Las Vegas, and maybe the whole world, needed to be reminded of. True power isn't about how much fear you can inspire. It's not about how many people will back down when you walk into a room. True power is about standing up when it's easier to sit down, speaking up when it's safer to stay quiet, protecting the powerless when you could just protect yourself. Dean Martin was famous for being cool, for his effortless charm, his quick wit, his perfectly tailored tuxedos, and his glass of scotch that was really apple juice. But that night in the Sands Hotel dining room, he was something more important than cool. He was courageous. And that courage, the willingness to put everything on the line for someone who couldn't fight back, is what transformed a celebrity into a legend. Not in the Hollywood sense, but in the way that really matters. In the whispered conversations of waiters and busboys, dealers and maids, all the invisible people who keep the glamorous machine running. They knew. They remembered. And they told their children, who told their children, about the night Dean Martin stood up for one of their own. Tommy, the Hammer. Marcello died in 1982. His obituary in the Las Vegas Review-Journal listed his business interests and mentioned his complicated relationship with Nevada law enforcement. But it didn't mention the night he slapped a waiter or the night a singer made him back down. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. His obituaries celebrated his music, his movies, his place in American culture. They mentioned the Rat Pack, his partnership with Jerry Lewis, his effortless cool. But Michael Rossini, who attended the funeral in Los Angeles carrying flowers from his restaurant, knew the truth. The headline achievements were impressive. But the real measure of Dean Martin wasn't in the gold records or the sold-out shows. It was in the moments when nobody was watching, when there was nothing to gain and everything to lose, when doing the right thing meant standing alone. That's the night a gangster slapped a waiter, and Dean Martin's response became legend. Not in the newspapers or the history books, but in the hearts of everyone who ever needed someone to stand up for them. And sometimes, that's the only kind of legend that really matters.